In the last class, we were discussing regarding climate, then vegetation, and presence of other animals. And what is remaining is the physical barrier. We have to understand what is a physical barrier and what are the subtypes of physical barrier and how physical barriers are influencing in the distribution of animals. Now here you can find a definition itself. There are barriers such as mountains, desert, river, ocean that are physically stopping animals. For example, if there is a river, we cannot easily go move through that river. If we know swimming, to some extent we can cross that river. But if it is a big river, it may not be possible for all the animals, or including human beings, to cross that animal. So most of the barrier will be physically preventing. For example, if it is a grassland animal, a deer or antelope or zebra, and if there is a forest in between, that forest will be preventing the passage or crossing over of that herbivorous animal. So that animal cannot pass through that forest. So anything that physically stop an animal from moving to a new area is known as a physical barrier. So a best example of physical barrier are mountains. Since there is a mountain chain between India and China, animals from India cannot move to the China, or animals present in Russia or China region cannot come to India. So that Himalayan mountain chain is preventing the movement of animals. So such barriers which are physically preventing animals from moving to one area is known as a physical barrier. So they physically stop animals from invading. Invading means occupying to new areas even when environment is conducive. Conducive meaning suitable, ideal, suitable for their survival. So that is the definition of a physical barrier. Anything that physically stop animals from moving to a new area. And here we can find the details of that. For land animals, water is a barrier. For example, we are mostly living on land. Most of the mammals and reptiles are living on land. So for such mammals and reptiles, water is acting as a good barrier. If there is a water body, either it is a river or it is a lake or if it can be an ocean, any kind of water body can prevent animals from moving to a new area. Now, another type of barrier is aquatic animals. In this aquatic animals, land can be a barrier. For example, now please listen here. There are animal fishes living in Arabian Sea. So there are many animals living in Arabian Sea. Those animals which are living in Arabian Sea, they cannot move to the Bay of Bengal unless they have to swim around India. So Indian continent is acting as a barrier. If a fish is living in Gujarat area, it may not be possible for that fish to move to the Andaman Islands or the Andaman Sea or Bay of Bengal because land present between Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal is acting as a barrier. So animals living on water, for animals living on water, land is a barrier. Now freshwater fishes and amphibians cannot cross sea, but amphibious reptiles such as tortoises, lizards, and snakes, owing to a thick and impervious skin, have crossed seas to reach distant islands far away from the mainland. Here we can find some example. Most of the freshwater fishes and amphibians cannot cross sea because for amphibians they need fresh water. So if there is an island far away in an ocean, the amphibians as well as freshwater fishes cannot reach there because there is salt water in between. So freshwater fishes and amphibians cannot live in a freshwater, cannot live in a sea water or in a salt water. So they won't be able, that is why if we go to islands, most of the oceanic islands, we can only find very few species of amphibians. We cannot find several species of amphibians. Some species might have reached those islands, some by chance or by other means, and they will be able to successfully occupy that island and live there. But if you take any island, we cannot find many species of amphibians as well as reptiles. Now, the next point is that now amphibious reptiles such as tortoises, lizards, and snakes. Now, there are many islands like Galapagos Islands. You have heard about Galapagos Islands. Giant tortoises are living there. Now, why these giant tortoises have reached there? Because their body is thick as well as impervious. Impervious means not allowing the passage of water. Just like a plastic sheet, it won't be allowing the entry of water. So, for certain amphibious reptiles like tortoises, lizards, and snakes, because of their thick skin, they could swim in the seawater, and by swimming in the seawater, they were able to reach distant islands like Galapagos Islands, etc. So that is another case of another example. Now, on to another point, the climate and scarcity of vegetation makes desert and mountains effective barrier rather than the inability of animals to walk over them. There is another, for example, if you go to a desert area, very few animals, for example, there is a desert between India and Pakistan. We know that is known as a Thar desert. Similarly, between African continent and Europe, there is another desert called a Sahara desert. It's a very large desert. And now, because of the presence of this desert, many of the land animals are unable to cross across this desert. The reason is that in the climate in the desert is not suitable for their survival. So an animal may be able to walk through the desert, but because of the extreme climate, extreme heat, and lack of water or lack of moisture or lack of humidity, they may not be able to survive there for many days. That is why animals from India are not able to move to Pakistan because there is a intervening desert in between them. So that is the reason why other than climate and scarcity, scarcity means lack. Scarcity of vegetation simply means very few plants are there. Then, so the climate and the lack of plants make desert and mountains effective barrier rather than the inability of animals to, even though animals are capable of walking over them, because of the presence of extreme climate, which are not suitable for the survival of most of these land animals, desert is acting as a barrier. And similarly, rivers and lakes do not form effective barrier for most of the vertebrate species if they are good swimmers. For example, if in the use of large animals, a small river may not be good. For example, a small river like Muatuvra River, it is not very wide, maybe 1 kilometer or only wide, or some in some area maybe only half a kilometer, maybe in some area maybe less than half a kilometer. So such rivers cannot be a good barrier because many animals, especially dogs or other big animals, they can easily swim in the water and they can cross to another area. That is the point they have mentioned here. Rivers and lakes do not form effective barrier. They may be barrier for small animals, but for bigger animals, they are not acting as a good barrier. Then distribution of land animals is therefore restricted by one of the environmental limiting factors. So these kind of factors can prevent the distribution of animals. Now we have to see what are the different types. Here you can see that there is a river here. Between the river there is a mountain, and that mountain is acting as a barrier for aquatic animals. Now here what we are seeing, there are two land areas are there. Between these two land areas we are seeing a lake or a river, and presence of that river or lake is acting as a barrier. So this is how the water bodies or presence of land is acting as barriers. Now we will be seeing Some subtypes of barrier. Any factor that obstructs the distribution of animal is known as a barrier. How will you define barrier? And coming to the എടോ നിങ്ങൾ ബോയ്സ് ഇവിടെ വന്നിരിക്കും, നിങ്ങൾ എല്ലാവരും കൂടി അവിടെ കയറി ഇരിക്കല്ലേ, ഇവിടെ വന്നിരിക്കാനല്ലേ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത്. ബോയ്സ് എല്ലാവരും ഇങ്ങോട്ട് വന്നിരുന്നോ കേട്ടോ, ഫ്രണ്ടിലോട്ട് എവിടെയെങ്കിലും വന്നിരുന്നു. നിങ്ങൾ ആ രണ്ട് സൈഡായിട്ട് വേണമെങ്കിൽ ഇരുന്നോ. Okay, coming to the distribution of barrier. So, going to the barrier, going to the barriers, barrier means something that prevents the obstruct. Obstruct means prevent. Something that prevents the distribution of animals. So, anything that prevents the distribution of animal is known as a barrier. Now, here we can find two different types of barrier. One is known as an extrinsic barrier, another is known as an intrinsic barrier. Those barriers working from outside of an individual's body or the population are known as extrinsic barrier. There are two, for example, under the extrinsic barrier, mountain can be an extrinsic barrier, river can be an extrinsic barrier because it is outside the body of the individual. So any factor that is working outside the body of the individual or outside the body of animal is known as an extrinsic. Simply means external barrier. So either it can be extrinsic barrier or it can be external barrier. Now here there is another type of barrier known by the name intrinsic barrier, sometimes known as internal barrier. So in the case of internal barrier or intrinsic barrier, they result from the nature and behavior of an animal. For example, some animals may not be, in the last class I told you about koala. Koala is feeding only on eucalyptus leaves. Panda is feeding only on bamboo leaves. That is their behavior or nature. So that kind of barrier is known as a intrinsic barrier. Sometimes certain behavior may be responsible for the distribution of animals. So there are two types. One is extrinsic barriers are there and as well as the intrinsic barriers are there. Now we will be seeing what are the subtypes of extrinsic barrier as well as the subtypes of intrinsic barrier. Now under the extrinsic barrier we can find that there are three different types. One is physiographic, biotic barrier and climatic barrier. Let's see one by one. So physiographic barrier. Physiography simply means the features of the earth. For example, if you take a land, there may be mountains, there may be rivers. These features on the surface of the earth or surface of a land are known as basically physiographic map. You might have heard about physiographic map. So here we can find eight barriers. One is topography, then presence of large water bodies, land masses, impurity, lack of salinity, vegetative barrier, desert, pressure and ice mass. We can take one by one. So first barrier is known as a topographical barrier. So topography simply means, while studying about maps, you may be heard about topography. Topography simply means surface features of the land or surface features of the earth. On the surface there may be mountains, vegetation, sometimes desert, sometimes lakes. So these surface features of the earth are known as topography. So topographical barrier limits the distribution of terrestrial animals. Terrestrial animals means animals living on land. So animals which are living on land are prevented from moving to another area by presence of topographical barrier like mountains or presence of water bodies. So here you can see that Himalayan range. Himalayan range is acting as a barrier for the distribution of land animals from China to India or India to China. Similarly, you can also find another mountain. The second one is known as the Alps mountain. This is the Alps mountain. This Alps mountain range is present in Europe. That is also a tall mountain range. That is also preventing the distribution of animals between certain areas of the Europe. So here you can find certain surface features of Earth like mountains are acting as topographical barrier. Because of their large size, they are preventing the distribution of animals. Now, high and extensive mountain range limit the distribution of animals. Already we have discussed, that is Himalaya. This range is situated more or less parallel to the equator. Now, on the south of this range is the hot and moist plains of India with very distinct fauna like elephant, tiger. For example, this is the Himalayan range. The region south of Himalayan range is the Indian subcontinent or Indian mainland. In the Indian mainland, we can find many tropical animals like elephant. Then we can find tiger, etc. And leopard are there. So these animals need a warmer climate. Whereas if you take the animals living in China, Russia area, there we are not finding a tropical climate. We are finding a temperate climate or a colder climate. So only animals like panda or other kinds of animals which are more adaptable to the colder condition are able to live in those areas of the temperate region. So here you can find that the animals living in Indian region are resembling means similar. They are similar to the fauna of Africa. That is one reason the climate of Africa as well as the climate of India are somewhat similar. If you go to any African country, you can find that even the people there are very black. The climate is almost the climate in Kerala. The temperature may be around 25 to 30 degree. So the climate of Africa and India are very similar. That is one reason we are finding almost similar kind of animals in India and mainland and African. Then there is another reason also, once India and Africa were together. So there are a historical reason or evolutionary reason as well as behavioral reason. So whereas on the northern part of the Himalayan mountain, climate is colder and fauna is more similar to that is found in European region. For example, animals present in China are more similar to animals present in the Europe. Because Europe is a temperate climate, is having a temperate climate. China is also having a temperate climate. Okay. So next point is the water bodies. So coming to the physiographic barrier, there are 8 barriers. The first barrier is the topographical barrier. Under the topographical barrier, the best example is the case of Himalayan mountains or Alps mountain. Now we go to the second barrier, that is the presence of large water bodies. Here we can find how the barriers are preventing. There are large water bodies. This is one. The first map is a map of Africa and Madagascar. Here this is the African mainland and this is an island. And between that there is a large ocean. The ocean is separating them, and that ocean is known as the Mozambique Channel. But it is not very deep. Somewhat the depth is not that much as in the case of other areas. So it is a shallow channel, that is why Mozambique Channel. Now the water bodies like ocean river system like Ganges, Brahmaputra, Amazon. If you know about the Amazon or Brahmaputra or Ganges, these are very wide rivers, so that animals on one part of the river may not be able to cross to the other part of it. That means this, for example, is Amazon or Brahmaputra. They may be one or 2 kilometers, more than 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers wide. So such very large rivers can prevent the distribution of animals. So they are preventing the distribution of terrestrial fauna. Terrestrial fauna means land animals. Animals which are living on land are prevented from moving to another area. Now here you can find another example. There is Mozambique Channel. The width of this Mozambique Channel are 400 kilometers. So it is not easy for animals living in the African region to cross 400 kilometers and reach the Madagascar. So that is not so Mozambique Channel is separating African animals from animals living in Madagascar. Then subspecies of mice on opposite side. For example, this is an example of a river, and here there are a few subspecies species of mice or rat. Now what we have observed is that the rat species or mice species which are living on either side of this river are usually different. Maybe they might be belonging to the same species. Since the river is separating them, now they have developed into two separate species, or they become two separate subspecies. That is the point they have. Subspecies of mice on either side of the rivers are usually different. Now we can also see that water bodies like oceans are separating mammalian fauna. Generally, mammals are capable of swimming in the water and reaching faraway islands. But in the case of oceans, like what are this Mozambique Channel, they are 400 kilometers wide. So such wider water bodies can prevent the distribution of even larger animals like mammals. Now here we can find another example, that is a third type. So this is the third, there is large bodies of land masses. So we have already seen two cases. One is mountain or topographical barrier. Second one is the large bodies of water. And third barrier is the large land masses. Now look at here. We will see how large land masses can be a barrier. For example, desert, forest, open plains, grasslands. They are forming a barrier to the spread of aquatic animals. If there is a land between them, here this is the Pacific Ocean and this is the Caribbean Sea. And this area is the Panama or the Central America. This is the South America and this is the North America. Now here we are finding the Central American countries, mostly Panama, etc. So this Panama Bridge or Panama Land Bridge is now acting as a barrier for the movement of animals from Caribbean Sea to Pacific Ocean or from Pacific Ocean to Caribbean Sea. So that is how these large land masses can be a barrier for the movement of aquatic animals. Now here you can find another case. This is the Saharan Desert. Look at the Saharan Desert. Many countries are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 9 countries are part of the Sahara. So you can imagine how large the Sahara Desert. Around 9 countries are under that Saharan belt. So that Saharan desert can be a barrier for the animals living in the southern part of Africa to move to the northern part of the Africa. So that is how they are acting as a barrier. Then there is another case, is the Great Barrier Reef. Now I don't know, I have a, see, this is the Great Barrier Reef. Where is Great Barrier Reef situated? Great Barrier Reef is the coral chain which is present near the eastern side of Australia. This is the Australia, and this is the Queensland is an important state in Australia. Now here you can find the Great Barrier Reef, and that is stretching around nearly more than 1,500 kilometers from the southern to northern portion of the Australia. So that will be preventing the movement of animals from this part of the ocean to the inside channel of the Great Barrier Reef. So this is how the Great Barrier Reef, it is a coral chain, and in that coral chain, the depth of the sea may be very low, shallow sea may be there, the water conditions may be different, and so the animals living in the deeper ocean may not be able to reach into this small channel here. So like this, many coral chains can be a barrier for the distribution of many animals. So this is how land masses can be a barrier for the movement of many animals. Now we will see the next one. Yeah, okay, a few more points are animals which require water to complete a life cycle cannot move through dry, hot desert. For example, if you take the case of Africa, if you in this is the Central Africa or the tropical Africa, equatorial Africa. Many species of amphibians are flourishing here, living here. But they may not be able to cross and reach Moroccan region or in the European region, because the Saharan desert is there. So because for amphibians they need fresh water. If there is a lack of fresh water, they may not be able to cross that land. So that is the case why amphibians are always very limited in distribution. They are not present everywhere. Only in certain areas of the world we can find amphibians. So that is another reason. Then moreover, if other animals try to travel through desert, they must possess special type of adaptive features. For example, you might have heard about camel. Camels are known as the ships of the desert. The camel is highly adapted to live in desert. It has a very strong, thicker body. Even its nose can be closed to protect it from wind present in the desert. So camels are highly adapted to living there. The camels can live without water for many months. Maybe for 1 month or 2 months they can live without water. When there is availability of water, they will be drinking around 40 liters of water at a time. So camels are highly successful, highly adapted to live in desert. The fauna of South and North Africa are totally distinct due to the presence of Saharan desert. Here you can see that this is the North Africa and this is the South Africa, Southern Africa. And because of the presence of this Saharan desert, we are finding completely different animals or completely different fauna on the southern and northern side of the Africa. So that is some of the point. Then another is the Kalahari Desert. Do you know where is Kalahari Desert? Kalahari Desert is also a desert in Africa, especially mostly in the southern portion of the Africa. That is responsible for different composition of Central Africa and Cape of Good Hope. See, this is the Kalahari Desert. You can see that. You can find the Kalahari Desert here. So this region is known as the Cape of Good Hope. Cape of Good Hope. It is the extreme south of South Africa. Then now because Kalahari Desert is there, animals from the Central Africa are unable to move to the southern portion of the Africa. So that what we are now finding is that South African region are having a completely different animals or completely different fauna. The reason is that presence of this desert. So Kalahari Desert is acting as a barrier for the movement of animals from south to central area of Africa as well as from central area to south of Africa. So that is the peculiarity of how the land bodies are acting as a barrier for the movement or distribution of the animals. Now the next factor is the salinity. Salinity as well as impurity. Now salinity means is the amount of salt in a water. Now if you take seawater, most of the time seawater will be having a salt content of 3.5%. That is salt content of seawater. So salinity forms a barrier to freshwater fishes as well as amphibians. I have earlier told you that if you go to, if there are anybody from Lakshadweep, in your previous batch, there is one student from Lakshadweep. If you have those students coming from Lakshadweep, how many species of amphibians are there? They will be telling you what is the case there. Very limited number of amphibians are present in Lakshadweep or in Maldives or in other oceanic islands. Because animals, these freshwater animals are unable to cross the sea. If animals reach, has to reach Lakshadweep Islands, they have to cross the Arabian Sea. So Arabian, there is around more than 1,000 kilometers of sea between Kerala coast as well as the Lakshadweep. So the amphibians may not be able to cross such wider regions. So that is why if you go to the oceanic islands, we are finding only very limited number of amphibians. Then most of the corals are found in clear sea basins because they cannot survive dirty or impure water. Now if you see, take the case of corals, you might have studied about corals in the last class. The corals need a special environment, a special kind of, then even the temperature requirement is that always temperature should be always about 20 degree. The water, the quality of the water should be very good. There should not be any pollution. If pollution is there, most of the time coral animals will die. So because of that, the water present in the coral area, coral sea should be very clear with a lot of oxygen, higher temperature. Then only these animals may be able to survive there. For that reason, extensive coral reefs or sponges are never found near the mouth of large rivers such as Ganges, Amazon, Orinoco, Mississippi. These are Ganges are opening at the Ganges as well as Brahmaputra. The Brahmaputra is opening in the Sundarbans. You have heard about that Sundarbans. That is in the Bangladesh area, partially in Bangladesh as well as the Bengal of India. So they are the mouth of the ocean. That is where the ocean is. Ocean is releasing its water. Where the river is releasing its water into the ocean. In the mouth of the ocean, we cannot find any coral reefs. Because in the mouth of the ocean, usually known by the name estuary, the estuary, there will be variable salinity and there will be lot of sediments. The sediments carried by, if you go to the Kochi area, if there is some flooding in Idukki or some area, that all these sediments will be finally reaching the Kochi area and that will be depositing them. So in such areas, it is difficult for coral species to survive. That is the reason why coral reefs or sponges, they are never found near the mouth of large oceans like Amazon, Orinoco or Mississippi. Mississippi is a river in North America. Then Amazon, Orinoco is also in North America. Similarly, there are some coral sponges and brachiopods which cannot withstand slightest change in salinity because these corals are highly sensitive. They need a particular range of salinity. That is the case of sponges, porifera, the animals living in porifera, and there is a brachiopod, there is another some minor phyla. So these animals are very much sensitive to both temperature as well as salinity. If there is a slight variation in either temperature or salinity, they will die. That is the reason why when global warming is taking place, many of our coral animals are dying. When pollution is there, pollution is destroying many of the coral islands. So coral species. Now another factor is the case of depth. Now here you can find a clear idea how depth is influencing. Basically we are finding different types of animals based on their adaptability to depth. One is stenobanthic and other is the eurybathic. Stenobanthic animals as well as the eurybathic animals are there. So stenobanthic animals, they are confined to narrow variation, that is, they are unable to survive at different depth. So for example, some animals may be found only on the upper surface of the ocean. Some may be only on the lower surface of the ocean. So such animals are known as xenobiotic. They can survive only in a limited area, limited range of depth. Whereas some animals are capable of living in great depth. Uribathic. Uri means wide. Steno means narrow. Narrow depth as well as the wider depth. So Uribathic animals are capable of surviving in wider range of depth. Now, ridges on the ocean floor can act as a barrier to bottom dwelling animals. Here you can see that there is a picture showing how the land is sloping. Usually, this is the ocean and this is the land area. From the margin of the land, there is usually an area of around 50 miles where the sea is very shallow, and that region is known as a continental shelf. Continental, here you can see up to 50 miles or sometimes 250 kilometers. This land is very shallow. The sea is water is very shallow, and that is known as a continental shelf. Then we can find a sudden increase in depth. That is known as a continental slope. Then another is that sometimes the depth is again decreasing, and that is known as a continental rise. And the lowest point or the deepest point on the ocean are known as abyssal plain. Abyssal means the very deep. Now here you can heard about deep sea Marina Trench or Challenger Deep. Have you heard about that? There is a very deepest part of the ocean is known as a Marina Trench or Challenger Deep. So there about 12,500 feet. Average depth of the ocean is around 12,500 feet. So based on the depth, some animals are capable of surviving in different depth, whereas some animals are only capable of surviving in narrow range of depth. The next one is the case of pressure. The pressure gradient of the sea water limits the distribution of sea animals at different depth. Here you can find a soulfish. That is, some animals can only survive at the bottom of the sea, whereas some animals can only survive on the top part of the ocean. So that because there is a difference in the pressure. The deeper part of the ocean, the deepest region of the ocean may be having very high pressure. So animals which can survive or withstand heavy pressure, high pressure, can only survive there. This is an example of some soulfish-like animal. The pressure of water in the deep sea is maximum and gradually decrease to its surface. So as we move upward from the deepest deep sea to upper surface of the ocean, pressure gradually decreases. Deep sea adapted animals cannot come to low pressure like heterosomata. This example is a heterosomata. These animals can only survive in the deeper region of the ocean. They may not be able to survive at the surface region of the ocean. On the other hand, surface dwellers and pelagic animals cannot go down. For example, many fishes like sardine, mackerel, etc. They can only live on the surface water of the ocean. They cannot go to the lower area of the ocean. So animals which are adapted to live on the surface areas. Surface areas are usually known as pelagic. So some animals are pelagic in nature. That means they will be surviving only in this narrow range. Whereas some animals are living on the bottom of the sea, like heterosomata. They can withstand very high pressure. So, but these animals cannot survive at a lower pressure. So that is the peculiarity of these animals living in different areas. Now, another case is the presence of water current. Okay, it will come. So next point is the presence of water currents. So under the water currents, you might have seen that there is a difference in the flow of water. Now, if you take a fresh water, some animals are capable of living in fast flowing rivers, where some animals need a slow flowing water. They may not be able to survive in water bodies which are where the flow of water is very high. So that is the peculiarity. That is, and based on that, we have two kinds of types of animals. One is a lotic animals, and other is a lentic animals. Lotic animals means animals which are able to live in fast flowing water, where animals which are living in slow flowing water or sedentary water or standing water are known as lentic animals. So lentic animals are the, as well as lotic animals are the, lotic animals can only survive in water bodies which are where the water current is very high, or the movement of the water is very high. Then upstream dispersal. Upstream dispersal means, for example, normally animals are moving from upper areas of the river. For example, for an animal that is present in Idiki region, they can easily reach Kochi region because there is a variation in depth. But for an animal, for a fish living in Kochi area, to reach the Idiki region may not be easy, because the flow of water is always from Idiki to Kochi region. So if the animal is following the path of the water flow, it is easy. But if an animal is swimming in the opposite direction, that is from Kochi region to Idiki region, that may not be easy. That is known as upstream. Upstream dispersal is difficult. So moving against the flow of water. So that moving against the flow of water is not always possible. It is very difficult. So currents are detrimental. Detrimental means harmful. Currents are harmful for all suspended animals. Suspended animals means animals which are living suspended in the water. Or there are small water animals are there. They may be dissolved they may be living in the water, but we cannot see easily. But they may be planktonic organisms. So these are all living suspended in the water. If there is a strong water current, that will be destroying these suspended animals. Now the next is the case of ice mass. Now in the case of ice mass, here you can see that during the Pleistocene period, the Scandinavian ice mass as well as Alpine glacier came very nearer, and this is of 480 kilometer. They become very cold and act as a barrier between Atlantic and Mediterranean areas. Here you can see that. That is that is in the European region. The formation of this ice mass took place during the Pleistocene. Pleistocene means not very old, maybe 2 lakh or 3 lakh period before. During that period, an ice mass of around 500 kilometers in wide, in width, they become present between the European region as well as the Mediterranean region, and that prevents the movement of animals from the Mediterranean. Mediterranean area means the areas like Greece. This is the Mediterranean area, and from this Mediterranean area, movement of animals to the northern portion of Europe become difficult because of the presence of this ice mass. So ice sometimes act as a barrier. So ice can be a barrier for the movement of many animals. And here you can find, as a result, European bears were divided into two groups. One renamed as Ursus arcturus in the eastern part, while other which went to the western part got transformed into a new species known as Ursus pileatus. So in the case of this European bear, earlier we have only one type of bear, and that bear was known by the name Ursus arcturus. And now, because of the presence of this ice mass between Mediterranean and Atlantic Ocean, this polar bear and this European bear were divided into two separate populations. One population that is present in the western region, became converted into a new species known by name Ursus spilaeus, whereas another species which is present in the eastern part is known by the name Ursus arcturus. So this is how sometimes the presence of land masses can prevent the distribution of animals. Now the next one is the vegetative barrier, and about which we will be taking in the next class. So today we will be stopping here.